3, 2, 1, go.
And welcome into PressBox Live. I'm Stan the Fan Charles of PressBox and PressBoxOnline.com. And with me is my co-host on these Thursday night soirees into the world of sports, Gary Stein. Gary, how are you?
First time in a month, Stan. I feel like I've been off for a year.
Yep. Is your daughter
good.
your daughter's still married
As
To
far
the
as
sa-
I know, at this
to-
point, yeah.
to the same young man?
At this point, I believe
Okay.
so. Yeah.
All right, we're glad to hear that.
Thank
Hey,
you.
that other smiling face is that of an old friend, Bill Stetka. Bill and I've known each other a long time, and we're going to talk about the summer we met, 1983, in just a moment. But first, I want to tell you about, in addition to the Costas Inn, AJ Michaels, their expert and award-winning AJ Michaels heating, AC, plumbing, and home performance will improve your home's energy efficiency and comfort levels. The AC season is sweltering right now. There are new rebates and discounts available. More at ajmichaels.com. Bill Stetka is with us. He's the director of alumni affairs for the Baltimore Orioles, but also team historian for the Baltimore Orioles. And Bill, first of all, thank you for coming on. And how's wife Alex Stetka doing?
Alex is doing well. She's out at some foster cat meeting tonight. We've been fostering cats for about the last 10 months, and actually she's been very successful at it.
That's great.
We've had 21 cats, and
Oh, my.
20 of them have been adopted. We have one that is just ready to be adopted now. So,
Gary, you have any interest in bringing a cat into your home? You already have a couple.
I
don't you?
actually have a cat already, so we're cat people. I definitely feel you, Bill.
yeah, well, we have 3 of our own. We just had 2 litters of kittens with us.
Oh,
So
God.
we had a 4 set and a 3 set.
Mm.
So
Wow.
I had 10 cats and our toy poodle running around here.
That's a busy house.
Hey, I want to move the talk from cats to birds. And Bill, you and I probably met maybe a year before that, but 1983 was really a special summer. And the first thing I got to ask you, because it blows me away that it's 40 years, is the Orioles had been in the 66 World Series, the 69 World Series, 70, 71, 79. They made it back in 83. Did you think there was any world in which it would be 40 years and they hadn't been back to a World Series?
No, never. I mean, I thought for sure in 97, we went wire to wire.
Yep.
I think we had the best team.
Yep.
One Armando Benitez slider to Tony Fernandez blew that out of the water. In 2014,
14.
we just ran into a hot Royals team. I mean,
Yep.
everything, we scorched everything and they caught it and they blooped and blipped everything. And, that was it.
So,
That's baseball.
that's baseball. That's what
And
everybody
why,
says.
if you get there, you have a shot.
Yeah.
You know,
The reason it's funny, the reason I wanted to have you on, and I initially tried to have you a week ago and you were out of town, but the reason I wanted to have you on, the Orioles had lost 6 out of 7 games. And I think the fan base was getting very jittery, like, this might be more realistic as to what we were. And then the team won 5 in a row before the All-Star game. But I wanted to go back to 1983 and talk about 2 7-game losing streaks. Do you remember them?
absolutely. We lost 7 games in a row in May. We were at one point we had a 4-game lead and then that went away. We battled back and forth. I mean, at one point it was Toronto, New York, Milwaukee, Detroit, us. Everybody was jockeying for position. And but come mid-August, we'd lost another 7 in a row.
Yep.
And we're sitting in 3rd place. We were only a game out, but we're in 3rd place, tied with the Yankees, behind 2 teams, that are tied for first. and it didn't look promising. Not only that, but we had to call up Bill Swaggerty to
Yep.
make his major league debut in Chicago. I think it was August 13th. And, Swags, he didn't get the win, but he went 6 innings, only gave up 2 runs. We came back and won. And all of a sudden we took off. We went 34-10 until we clinched a week before the season ended.
Before I turn you over to Gary, from the end of the first 7-game losing streak to the beginning of the second one, we had 4 3-game losing streaks in that period. But
Mhm.
all the other streaks combined inside that, the club was 40-5 in addition to those 4 3-game losing streaks. So the club played some sensational baseball. And I remember Tom Boswell writing a piece saying that the really good teams have 2 great winning streaks in them. The great teams have 3. And I think you're alluding to that 3rd winning streak, from the end of the second losing streak till the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, it just, they took off. And the whole season was, I mean, first off, you have Earl Weaver retiring after 82. So
Right.
Joe Altobelli comes in,
Right.
and, they basically, they had a veteran team that had lost the series in 79, went down to the last game in 82. John Lowenstein once told me, he said, all Joe had to do was manage the bullpen. We had the rest of it. As Earl said, just don't screw it up.
Yep.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what they did. They were a veteran team, kind of unlike this year's team,
Yep.
which is
Very
very
young. Yep.
but they were a veteran team. They knew what they had to do. They knew what they'd been through, and they weathered a lot of obstacles. The pitching staff. Mike Flanagan was lost for 11 weeks.
Yep.
Homer missed about 2 months. Dennis Martinez, was suffering through personal problems. So all of a sudden, Storm Davis gets pulled out of the bullpen. Alan Ramirez comes up and makes 10 starts. Mike Boddicker gets called up in May to take Davis's place in the bullpen, and then gets thrown into a start.
When Flanagan went down. Yeah.
Flanagan went down in the second game of that doubleheader,
Yep. Yep.
and Boddicker comes in the second game and throws a shutout and goes 16-8 the rest of the way. That was a guy that Earl Weaver couldn't
fit into the
into
rotation.
the rotation.
Gary?
So Bill, let me ask you a couple of questions. First of all, on the note that Stan was talking about before, could you believe it's been 40 years since the Orioles have been to the World Series, 1983? There's only one team in the American League right now that has had a longer streak of not being in the World Series, and that's the Seattle Mariners, who have never been to the World Series
Right.
after beginning in 1977. Oh,
There's a
and there's
cat.
my cat,
There's
Bill.
a cat.
I came down in the basement to avoid the cats. So.
I usually do that too, but I must have forgotten that today. But either way, so that's interesting. I mean, you'd never think that would be the case. But I want to talk a little bit about Altobelli, because you mentioned that Weaver coached, managed his last game, 1982, lost to Milwaukee. I was doing a little research, and I wasn't here at that time, but I remember this season very well. Altobelli was a much different manager than Weaver in many ways, but not the least of which in how he managed the pitching staff. Weaver started 3 or 4 guys the year before, maybe 6 total. And Altobelli, as you say, because of injury and other situations, but he believed in a larger starting pitching staff. And I just wonder, from your perspective, his management of that season in general.
I think he doesn't get some of the credit he deserves. I covered that team for the News American and Sports First, the
All sports newspaper.
all sports newspaper that the News American tried to put out for a little over a year. But Joe was, I think he had managed before. with the Giants.
Giants,
So
yeah.
he wasn't really a rookie at it. And like I said, I think he knew he had a lot of veterans on the team. He relied heavily on Ray Miller, the pitching coach. And I think that between the two of them, they managed, both the starting core and the relief core, as well as you could ever expect, given all the problems. I mean, in addition to the starting pitchers, we lost Tippy Martinez. He had an appendectomy during the season and, then had to come back. So, I think Joe deserves a little more credit than he's been given. I certainly think he was, not the box of rocks that people think he was. I'm not sure that he was, but I think his best move was kind of letting the veterans go and, letting them work things out.
What about the move of Cal Ripken from third to short, his first season as a major league shortstop in 1983?
Well, I mean, it actually had come about, the second half of 82. But, he was destined. I mean, everybody knew Cal was going to be a player.
Yeah.
He won the Rookie of the Year in 82. 83, he beats out Eddie Murray, who arguably had, better statistics, but he beats him out for the AL MVP award. Even as a second year young shortstop, his defense was phenomenal. He knew where to play. He studied the opposition. I don't know what more you can say about Cal.
Yeah.
Bill, let me ask you a question. Let's go back to mid-June 1976. The team that ended up in 2 World Series over 4 years, 79 and 83 and 1 in 83. How much does the credit go to that trade, the one in which we picked up Scott McGregor, who became a sort of, really rock solid starter for several seasons, brought back the catcher, Rick Dempsey,
Right.
and the relief pitcher, Tippy Martinez.
Oh, I mean, that along with several other trades, but that was a huge trade. I mean, to get a catcher and 2 pitchers that are going to be with you for 10 plus years,
Yep.
And perform the way they did. I mean, I don't think people realize Scott McGregor has, I believe it's the 7th best ERA in postseason play among pitchers with 50 or more innings.
All time.
All time. His win-loss record isn't that great because he lost a 2-1 game, he lost a 3-2 game, but he's got a 1 point something ERA in postseason play, and he pitched all but I believe it's like 1 2/3 innings of the games he was in. I mean, I don't know how much more you can do than that.
The trade the Orioles made that brought Gary Renicky to the team. Talk a little bit about Renicky Lowenstein in 1983.
Well, it's funny. I think it's a little overblown about the platoon. Gary played a lot more against right-handers than people think he did.
Right.
But I mean, and as a platoon, they actually had better stats in previous years. But the two of them worked magic. You add Benny Ayala into that with, and then you have Dan Ford and Jim Dwyer, right field, and the mix of DHing and outfield. There was such a mix of guys that they could go to. If you bring in a relief pitcher, we got somebody to counter him. It was such a good unit Um, you know, I don't think, I think Gary sometimes, in talking with him, he feels like the whole platoon thing is overblown because, he got a fair number of at bats that year. But, and then the funny part is, the game that stands out that year is the August game where, Tippy picked the three runners off, where
That was on Cal's birthday.
it was on Cal's birthday. They go into the ninth inning trailing Toronto, and Altobelli pulls out every stop. He's using pinch hitters and pinch runners trying to tie the game, and ultimately does. But now he's out of catchers, he's out of infielders. So Lenny Sakata, the backup infielder, little Lenny goes behind the plate. Gary Renicky plays third base for the first time. Lowenstein, who hadn't played the infield in about 5 years,
Plays
goes
second
to
base.
second base. And you got Ayala, and I can't remember if it was Shelby and Dwyer in the outfield.
Probably.
But he'd used everybody. I mean, there was nobody left. I mean, and Cliff Johnson hits a home run, puts the Blue Jays ahead in the 10th. Tippy comes in with a runner on first, picks him off, gives up a walk, picks him off, gives up a hit, picks him off.
Crazy.
Sakata, Cal
Bill, as an official scorer, you were an official scorer too in your day.
yes,
Wasn't one of those Barry Bonnell technically a caught stealing?
yes, technically
Okay,
it was because
okay.
he broke
I
for
just-
second,
Yeah,
but you
he was
still say
picked
he
off.
picked it
He was
off,
picked
you
off. Yes.
It's and then Cal comes up in the bottom of the 10th and homers to tie the game, and who else but Len Sakata hits a 3-run homer to win it.
The winner. Yeah.
I mean, that's magic. That's
It
Orioles
can't-
magic.
That's Orioles magic. Cal hit that home run off of Dennis Lamp, didn't he?
I believe so.
Hey, we're going to continue going down memory lane, but we're going to fast forward too and talk a little bit about some of the characteristics of this 2023 team that have Bill and so many fans excited. But right now, I'll tell you about something else that's got you excited: the taste of Maryland steamed crabs, or Maryland style steamed crabs, because so many steamed crabs today are from Texas and Louisiana. But the Costas Inn's recipe for steaming them and seasoning them, second to none. 4100 North Point Boulevard is their address. They've been there only 53 years, so I don't think they're going anywhere. Great family restaurant for any kind of food you want. But if you want crabs, you better call ahead, 410-477-1975. Reserve your crabs, pick out the size you want, the price point you want. The Costas Inn will do all the rest. And don't forget, if you go to their website, costasinn.com, you can order your food, pay for it online, and then just pick it up. You don't even have to get out of your car. All right, that's the Costas Inn. Back to talking Orioles. Gary, I'll give you the first couple.
Yeah, well, before we get to the 2023 Orioles, let's stay back there in '83 for just a minute, and I'll ask Stan.
How old were you? How old were you in 83, Gary?
I was 21.
21. Yeah.
21. And I was living in DC. So I actually did come up to a couple Oriole games here in '83. But Bill, you were a sports writer back then. I want to take like a step to the side for a minute here back in '83 and just talk a little bit about the sports landscape that that Baltimore was in at that time. It was a really interesting time to be a Baltimore sports fan, in that the Orioles were still pretty much at the top of their game, although it was at the tail end of it. But the Colts were basically on their way out. We had a horrible owner. And the Blast actually had come from Houston and made a big impact. And I think they won the championship that year, 83, 84, if I'm not mistaken. So just talk a little bit about the sports landscape back then and what it was like to be a Baltimore sports fan.
Well, it's funny. I remember I covered, as part of the News American coverage, the last Colts game, which nobody knew at the time it was going to be the last Colts game, but in 1983, and certainly, I mean, they were, they were down. They had, they were not drawing well. People were upset with the owner, the general manager, everything was, going haywire. I remember most vividly, I was at spring training in '84, when the Colts moved.
Hmm.
And, just being around the Oriole players, they were in total shock.
Hmm.
I mean, they were asking us questions, and it was just, nobody could believe it. The players were wondering, well, what now? What now? We're going to get a team back. We got to get a team back. Now, nobody knew, if you were prescient enough to see the future, the Colts leaving begat Camden Yards,
Right, exactly.
and begat the Ravens.
Were the crowds better in '83 because nobody was really going to the football games?
I don't know if I think it was more of it wasn't so much you were a Colts fan or an Orioles fan, you were a Baltimore sports fan.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just jump in. I know the question was asked of you, but again, my first boss in radio, Harry Shriver, they had taken over the radio rights in 1979. And that's when Harry had a vision, and I don't think he gets enough credit for it, of what radio married to baseball could do.
Yeah.
And the attendance took off for the next 10 years,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
led to the new stadium being built, and was unbelievable.
I mean, what happened in '79? I mean, the Doug DeCinces home run against Detroit, with the Bill O'Donnell and Charlie Ekman in the booth, Charlie hollering, "Get out of here, get out of here," is a Baltimore classic moment
Yeah.
in sports. I mean, it's the first time I ever heard Bill O'Donnell,
Yeah. Emotional.
really get excited
Yeah.
and emotional. Bill was a great broadcaster, but he was, pretty, middle of the road, don't get too excited. Don't get too down.
Don't be too much of a homer.
No. But that certainly, and you're right, Stan. I mean, what WFBR did on radio at that time certainly jumped the Orioles up.
And it was fueled, in fairness to Gary's question, there's no question it was fueled in part because people were pissed off at the Colts and didn't believe in them anymore, and they wanted some outlet, and baseball was it, and it was.
Yeah.
What did FBR do differently?
They promoted the game.
They promoted the game
promoted
24 hours
at
a
all
day.
times.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Whereas, previously you would, you might get a couple hits during the day saying, the Orioles play tonight, tune in at 7:35 or whatever. But FBR started promoting constantly. They would
Play highlights all
they
the
would
time.
play highlights throughout the day. I mean,
Gotcha.
79, with Johnny Walker, the morning DJ, when he put "You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet" by Bachman Turner Overdrive, and would intersperse clips
Yep.
from the radio calls, and it would go on for 10 minutes.
Great. Yeah.
I mean,
And they
you
gave me,
can't- you
my.
can't buy that kind of commercial time.
No, you can't.
Right.
And they
that's-
created my show, Gary. On weekends, I was born.
Yeah.
Stan the Fan was born.
There you go.
Yeah,
Okay.
Stan had a weekend show. I would host on his Jewish holidays.
Jewish holidays and my vacations.
And your
My
vacations,
vacations. I didn't want to get Gary. I knew even then I didn't want to get somebody too good to replace me. So I asked.
Well,
Bill
you did a
Stecker
good
to-
job.
I
You did a good
Perfect.
job.
Hey, Bill, let's fast forward to today. The attendance, I don't know, we'll ever get back to being as emotional and as packed every day as it was in 83, 79 through 83. But it's starting to feel that I know there's tremendous interest in the team. Can you compare the interest in the team today to sort of, can you compare it to how enthused people were back in those days?
I think there's a ton of enthusiasm. I can tell the difference. You know, I'm a big golfer.
Yep.
I play weekends at Hobbits Glen, and not a day goes by that I don't have 4 or 5 people come up to me and talk about the game the night before,
Mhm.
or talk about, you know, some situation. You know, I hope they bring this guy up. You know, when are they going to bring this guy up? You know, it's the landscape is different today than it was back then. I mean, you know, every game is on TV. I think we only broadcast about 40 games on TV back in 83.
Yeah,
You
probably.
know, and I think people forget those differences. You know, I know a lot of people say it's a lot easier to sit in my living room. You know, I don't think there's anything better than being at the ballpark. You know, I love going to hockey games. I'm a big Caps fan,
Yep.
and I'll watch them on TV. But if somebody says, "Hey, let's go down to the game," I'm there. I love being in the arena. You know, I have Ravens tickets. I love going to the Ravens games. There's something about being there that's different than watching it on TV.
Yep.
And the same with baseball. And particularly now with the pitch clock and the new rules,
Sure.
you know, the game doesn't feel forced or dragged. It moves along at a good pace. You know, it's funny because I sat this winter, one day Masson was showing the game 5 of the 83 World Series. Scott McGregor against Charlie Hudson.
Sunday afternoon.
Sunday afternoon in Philly. I was at the game covering it, but I sat and watched this game, and I pulled my phone up and put the stopwatch on it. Neither McGregor nor Hudson at any point in the game, whether there was a runner on or not, took more than 15 seconds to throw a pitch.
Interesting.
That's very
Interesting.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I was stunned by it.
Yeah.
So I said, you know, if these guys could do it, you know, I think the game now moves along at a nice pace. You know, I know the Players Association has talked about wanting to slow the pace down in postseason and all. You know, you can give them another couple seconds. That's fine.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you know, let's not do away with it. You know, the game is so much crisper now. You know, I can't. You know, I know Brandon Hyde's talked about. You know, we've had a couple of long games, meaning 3 hours and 5, 3 hours and 10 minutes.
That's a long game now.
Yeah. And Brandon Hyde has said, "Can you imagine without the clock? You know, those would be over 4 hours."
Yep.
You know.
Bill, let me ask you, and then I'll get Gary to ask you a couple more, and then we'll let you get out of here. You've been a student of the game for a long time. I don't mean to blow smoke up somebody's keister, but I have not witnessed what Mike Elias has done over this 5-year period he's been here. I can't imagine. I can't come up with the GM that's done a better job at rebuilding a team on such a quick schedule like that.
No, not as bad as we were.
Yeah.
You know, he's done a you know, I think he's done a great job. You know, like you say, you can look back to, you know, the Hank Peters early days, you know, making all the trades. I mean, we weren't a bad club back then. We certainly had a number of, you know, good players, but the players that he acquired in those first couple of years,
Yep.
and then adding a couple draft picks into that mix. It made us the team we were, from the late 70s into the early 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a great time for us. But
Hey, Bill.
Mike has done a fabulous job. I mean, I'm interested to see. I mean, this year, we drafted a lot more pitchers than we've been used to
I had a
drafting.
feeling they
You know,
would.
Yeah, and I kind of thought we might too. I'm interested to see, if we make a move and what kind of move, to strengthen ourselves, at the trade deadline. We certainly have, enough burgeoning talent at the minor league level to make a trade if it fits what Michael Elias wants to do.
Yeah.
Because look, we've got so many infielders and so many outfielders, and there's only 4 spots in the infield and 3 spots in the outfield that you can play them. So if you can pick up somebody that makes sense, even if it's a rental and you give up 1 or 2 players, you got, when we're this close, you have to go for it.
Yeah, it's interesting. For the first time in a long time, the Orioles could be buyers as opposed to sellers at the deadline. Hey, I want to tie in a couple things, Bill. You mentioned like when you're on the golf course, you've got a lot of people coming up to you talking about last night's game. You've been involved with the Orioles for 40 plus years, so you've seen the highs and the lows. There was that 14-year period between 97 and 11 when the Orioles were basically in the wasteland, and then Showalter came around, Andy MacPhail, etc. And then there were the 3 years of Mike Elias, where they lost 100 games plus. Was that the lowest point? Like what were your golf buddies talking about during the 3 years when they were 100 plus losses?
Mainly, I hope it works.
So they still had hope.
They still had hope.
Okay.
But they weren't tuning in like they are now. They weren't going to games like they are now. It was more, cautious optimism, I guess. Just I hope it works.
And there was at least a plan that was laid out. I think the period Gary alluded to from 97 to 2011,
Like what was happening?
there was no plan,
No,
and Gary left out Dan Duquette, who came along
Right.
after the 11 season. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was the PR director back then, and it was tough. It was very tough. And, we went through managers and general managers like I go through underwear. And
Like Alex goes through cats.
yes. But and that was certainly a tough period. I think there was more of a somewhat of a cautious optimism with Mike coming in. Certainly it was painful going through it. But as you saw seeds being planted and what was going on, it became easier to buy into it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I agree.
As soon as Mike was named GM, I went out and bought the book Astro Ball.
So did I. Yeah.
And read it. And while Mike doesn't really play a significant role in the book, Sig Mejdal does. But you can see Mike is kind of, his hands are in there.
Yeah.
And I thought, well,
And he's learning. Learning. Yeah.
Yeah. If this worked their way, it can work here. And knock on wood, so far it has.
You got one more, Gary?
I'm good. I'm good for now.
Then I want to ask one more question, Bill. Alex posted something about a month ago, and I think it was on Facebook. Have you now watched, is it 4,000 Oriole games?
Yeah,
Was that the right number?
that was the right number.
How did you come up with that? Like, I always
It's gonna
wonder how
be more
they,
than that.
I had to come up with, I always wonder how they came up with how many burgers were sold in McDonald's. How did you arrive at that number?
Well, the little kid nerd in me used to keep track of games that I went to.
Okay.
You know, I had a notebook that I would write down when we went to a game as a kid. I saw my first game in 1961.
Mhm.
And just kept track, and then lost track of the notebook at some point and went back and calculated and kept it through my days as a reporter, official scorer, PR. And yeah, a few weeks ago, it dawned on me. I hit, I mentioned it to Alex, not for her to post it, but she likes to do things
He
like that.
did.
So, today is going to be my 4,000th Oriole game,
wild.
regular season Oriole game.
That's wild.
And
Wait, so
Yeah.
you mean 4,000 that you've attended? You've been in the state?
Attended. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, I hear you.
That's amazing. Amazing. Bill,
I
we
wish I could say I played in some of them, but
appreciate,
Now that
Bill-
would be something.
yeah,
Bill, really appreciate your taking the time to take us back to 40 years ago and revisit some of that. It was a great summer. And I
Thank
think Baltimore baseball fans this year are in store for potentially every bit as exciting a ride. You know, Earl Weaver used to say, it's like a roller coaster ride. You got your peaks and you got your valleys. And he'd say, sometimes you go, right now we're in one of the valleys, but nothing like pennant race baseball.
no, not at all. Stan, if I could,
Yep.
for one sec, we are celebrating the '83 reunion, the weekend of August 4th and 5th. August 5th at the ballpark, a pregame ceremony. It'll be Eddie Murray bobblehead night. August 4th, the Oriole Advocates will hold their annual luncheon honoring the '83 team. We have
Are there still tickets
still tickets
available?
available. You can get them by emailing advocatesluncheon@gmail.com or call 443-286-3735. They'll take it. We've got right now a little over 20 players committed to the reunion. So it looks like a good time.
All right.
Hey, guys, speaking of the Eddie Murray bobblehead, hold on one second.
I saw Eddie Murray up there. Yep.
There's my UMBC Oriole hat. That's first
Okay.
of all.
All
After
right.
they won, after they beat Virginia, and then here we go.
And that's the Eddie Murray statue.
There you,
Yep.
there you got it.
Yeah.
All right. Bill, we appreciate it. Hope you get another 4,000 games in before we check out. All right.
God bless. You got it.
If I'm 120, maybe I can shoot my age in the golf course.
And I don't know if I ever thanked you, but thanks for sitting in for me so many times back in 1983 and 84.
Not a problem. Happy
All
to do
right.
it, Stan. All right,
for
Gary, good
Gary-
seeing you again.
For
You too.
Gary
Thanks, Bill.
Stein, Bill
Appreciate you.
Stetka, I'm Stan the Fan. We thank our friends at AJ Michaels and the Costas Inn. Gary and I will be back next Thursday with a special guest, and I'll be back on Monday with Ross Grimsley. O's have 3 against the Marlins starting tomorrow night, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, then 3 against the Dodgers, all at Camden Yards. 3 against the Dodgers. All right. See you soon.
Good
Bill.
stuff. Yep.
All right.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.